Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Apostate of Mind. I'm Mark Peralta. And for today, I've got Rabbi Moshe Shulman again back on another prophecy evaluation. Only today, we're going to talk about the Messiah would be born of a virgin prophecy, typically referencing Isaiah 7:14. Does it really say virgin? What is it? What does the text say? What is the actual context? What's Isaiah trying to do with that? And is that really something to be taken prophetically? That and much more, folks. But before we get started, I want to remind you to please show your support by liking and subscribing our podcast, letting us know that we should continue doing this effort. And without further ado, Rabbi Moshe Shulman.
Let's deal with Isaiah 7:14. Now, we will get to the verse 7:14, by the way, eventually. But before we do that, we have to know what's going on here. There's a context, okay? Something's going on here. So let's go into that context right now, okay? The context of it is, obviously, we can start at the beginning of chapter 7 and see what it tells us. I'm going to read from 7:1 through 9. I want to give you, because 7:1 through 9 is giving us a background to understanding what's going to go on. And basically, it's a background for chapter 7 and chapter 8. I will argue when I talk about Isaiah 9, that's chapter 9, and also chapter 10. Okay? So we'll just concentrate on 7, 8 today, and we'll get to Isaiah 9, which is going to be the next one I'm going to do. We're going to do a little bit more about some of the other chapters here. So let's read what it says here. Chapter 7, verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham. Now, what's very important to understand in the book of Isaiah, if you do not know it, numerous times it'll stop and say, this happened in a certain time like this, because that's the beginning of another prophecy that Isaiah is giving. In a sense, when I talk about the book of Isaiah, it's very hard for me to talk about the book of Isaiah as one book. It's actually a collection of various different prophecies from various different times, usually, but not always, starting off with an introduction. So Isaiah 1 starts off with an introduction. These are things Isaiah says, certain period of time, go on through chapter 6. Okay, chapter 7 starts again setting the scene, as it were, for what's going on. Okay, so 7:1. And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Ritzin, the king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. Okay, so first, we're going to go very clearly, it's important. It has to be understood, by the way, that many Christians don't, that much of the material here is historical. These are real events, real people that these things are occurring to. Many Christians, because the New Testament seems very, as I said, there's only one person in the New Testament who has descendants alive today that we can point to. Whereas in the Tanakh, there's a whole Jewish people who have ancestors who are in the Tanakh. You can point to, hey, this is, I'm a Levite, so Levi ben Yaakov is my descendant, my ancestor. Okay, so you can point to some, hey, that's an ancestor of mine. Okay. There's more, but I'm just trying. The point here is that so there's a real events going on. Okay, these events are actually historic. We know we found actually documentation about these wars. So this is not something that didn't happen. So there's a real history back here of what's going on. So here we see that Aram and Israel made a pact with each other to attack Judah, because it was the kings of Israel very many times tried to do that, not always, but tried. Okay, 2. And it was told the house of David, saying, Aram is in confederation with Ephraim. Ephraim is a alternate name for Israel, the northern king of Israel, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people as the trees of the forest are moved with the wind. Meaning, they were basically shivering in the boots, I think is the expression. They were shivering in the boots because they were being subject to invasion by two kingdoms that together were stronger than they were. 3. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth and bring now to meet Ahaz, thou and Shir Yashiv, thy son. Shir Yashav, the translation of Shir Yashav, you should know, means a remnant shall remain. That's important because, as we mentioned a little bit, our conventions about naming, and we're going to talk about this more, Isaiah 9, Isaiah was told to name his children with names which were symbolic. Okay, so Shir Yashav was told to be a name because Isaiah was going to prophesy about how the Jewish people were going to go into exile and what's going to happen. And Shir Yashav was to say, don't worry about it. A remnant is going to remain. So his name was symbolic. Again, this is very, very common in Tanakh. You have to understand it. And it's very important because Christians misunderstand it and distort it. Isaiah 9 is going to be a good example of it. So again, I'm just mentioning, throwing it out here, Isaiah 9. I'm going to spend much more time, and I don't want to spend a lot of time here. It's the real place to spend the time on naming conventions is Isaiah 9. So again, to continue with that, Shir Yashav's son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field, that's apparently the place where he spoke, and say unto him, keep calm. That was going to be Achaz. Keep calm and be quiet, fear not, neither let thy heart be faint, because of these two tales of smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Retzin and Aram and the son of Amalia. Because Aram has counseled evil against thee, Ephraim also, and the son of Amalia, saying, let us go up against Judah and vex it. Let us make a breach there and for us, and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabat. Thus saith the Lord. So what were they planning on doing? Very important for understanding the story and the context of what's going on here. It was not just they were going to invade it. They were basically to make it somewhat of a vassal, extinguish the kingdom of David, and set up somebody else from another house in its place. Now, if you are familiar with the biblical story, you know that, in fact, in the northern kingdom, that's what happened. Okay? Yeroboam had the kingdom. He was killed by Omri, I think. And then another kingdom. We'll see that that Achav was killed and another kingdom took its place. These were constantly happening in the northern kingdom. Whereas in Judah, the kingship was always being with the descendants of David, because that was Hashem's promise. The promise that it would be the kingdom would be for David. But here, what's happening? The king of Israel and the king of Aram were getting together. What did they want to do? They wanted to end the house of David completely. Depose the king, put somebody in his place, and basically end the house of Israel, of David. Okay.
Was this before the Assyrian captivity?
Yes. Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel went into Assyrian captivity not very much longer after this. Maybe 100 years, I think it was after that. I don't have in front of me the chronology of it, but it wasn't very much longer after that. Okay. But importantly enough to remember is this: what are we talking about here? We're not talking about border wars and stuff like that. We're talking about a war of conquest and to depose the king there and set somebody else up in his place. Okay? So what do we see here? Thus said the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Retzin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. So 65 is 65 years later is when Assyria took it over. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Amaliah's son. And if you will not have faith, surely you shall not be established. Okay, so what do we see here? Very simple. Isaiah is setting the context for what's going to happen, the prophecy is going to give. What is it? We see these kingdoms, Israel and Aram, in concert together to destroy the kingship of the house of Judah, the house of David, and place somebody else on the throne. Now, we see this discussed in other places also, so I'm going to bring the other places in the Tanakh where we see it. One is 2 Kings 16, and the other is 2 Chronicles 28. I'm going to do the JPS, but the KJV has essentially the same thing. So we see in chapter 16, in the 17th year of Pekach ben Remaliah, okay, he's the king of Israel. Achaz, the son of Yotam, ben king of Judah, began to reign. Okay, that's when he became king. 20 years old was Achaz when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, he was like his God, like his David, his father. Okay, very important. You should know that the kings in Judah, basically they flipped. you'd have a bad king and a good king, a bad king and good king. Basically, was one after the other. One was a very righteous king. The next king wasn't so good. So, like for example, the king after Achaz is Hezekiah, Hezkiah. He's a righteous king. His son Manasseh was a wicked king. Manasseh's son Yeshayui, Josiah, is a righteous. So you get back and forth, back and forth. Okay.
Yeah, we see that trend for sure.
Yeah, we see that trend there. Okay. There were many righteous kings, but there were also many who weren't so good. Okay, so then it talks about the next paragraph how the bad things he did. Verse 5, then Nitzin, the king of Aram, and Kachba and Namai, king of Israel, came up against Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Achaz, but could not overcome him. At that time, Nitzin, king of Aram, recovered Eliath to Aram and drove the Jews out of. Jews here means as the people of Judah. From Eliath, and the Edomites came to Eliath and dwelt there unto this day. Okay, then it talks about how he sends to Assyria to help him, and that's what happens. The next passage we're going to look at in Book of Chronicles. Again, Chronicles is pretty much the same thing. I will point out something that I don't know how many of listeners will know about. There are two books, the Book of Kings and the Book of Chronicles. The Book of Kings deals with the kings of both Israel and Judah. Okay. However, the Book of Chronicles is all about the kingdom of Judah. That's its primary emphasis. So while the history of Chronicles starts from the very beginning and goes through a lot of stuff that's not there, primarily its purpose is to follow the kingdom of Judah until it ends. Whereas the Book of Kings is following after the Book of Samuel, continuing the history, but deals with both the northern and the southern kingdom. I don't know if people are aware of that, but this is real history. This is some people forget when they read the Bible, they memorize it and they forget this is real history. Chronicles is different because Chronicles has a different purpose. Chronicles' purpose is talking about the kingdom of Judah and not about the kingdom of Israel. That's why there's some very, very wonderful stories in the Book of Kings, like the story with Elijah the prophet. But because he was in Israel, he wasn't in Judah, we don't see that in Chronicles. Okay, so chapter 28 again is pretty much the same thing. Achaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, like David his father. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel in the northern kingdom, and made also molten images of the Baalim. Moreover, he offered in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burned his children in the fire, etc., etc. Okay, so we see what's happened. Verse 5, wherefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hand of the king of Aram, and they smote him and carried away of his a great multitude of captives. Okay, part of the kingdom was, but not Jerusalem, and brought them to Damascus. And he was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who smote him with great slaughter for Pekah and Remaliah slew in Judah 120,000 in one day, all of them valiant men, because they had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Notice how this is talking more about Judah, so it goes into more detail about what actually happened. But essentially, it's the same thing that we see on Isaiah. The two kings, Aram and Israel, were attacking Jerusalem, their goal being to overthrow the kingdom of David. And Zichri, the mighty men of Ephraim, slew Maasai, the king's son, and Zecham, the ruler of the house, and Achan, the next king. Okay, and the children of Israel carried their captives. Okay, so again, it talks again about the same thing, same issue. Again, historically, we've got a historical background here. We're talking about real events, historical events, and what the historical background is that these kings are trying to overthrow the house of David. Now, I want to emphasize again one point here, which is very important. Let's look back again at verse 6, where it says in Isaiah 7:6, let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tibal. Now, what's it talking about here? He wants to set up another kingdom, but what really is the implications of that? Okay, and this is very important to understand. When it's talking here, what exactly are the implications of having this happen? So we have to look at the second book of Kings, chapter 10. Now, to give a little background here, Ahav was a king in Israel. He was a wicked king. And God decreed that one of his generals, Yahu, should depose him and take over kingdom. Very similar to the story we're talking about in here in Isaiah. Tabel would be the one who would take over, down throw of the house of David, and he would be taken down. So here, Yehu would take over in place of Ahaz in his kingdom. So let's see how they deal with such a situation. And I want you to remember something. We're talking thousands of years before the Geneva Convention, okay? No such things as non-combatants, not everything like that, okay? When it came to war, no holds barred, okay? You have to understand that this is the way it was at that time. There was no Geneva Convention, okay? So nobody followed it. So we're dealing here now in chapter 10. Let's go to verse 6. This is talking about Yehu who sends a letter. Then he wrote a letter the second time to them saying, if ye be on my side, and if ye will hearken unto my voice, take ye the heads of the men of your master's sons, and come to me in your zeal by tomorrow this time. Now the king's sons, that's who he's talking about, these king's sons being Ahaz's sons, being 70 persons were with the great men of the city who brought them up. And it came to pass when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons and slew them, even 70 persons, and put the heads in baskets, and sent them unto him to Israel. Then verse 8 says, and then they came to mention, told them they have talks about that. Verse 12, Yehu goes and departs, and he rose and departed and went to Samaria. And as he was at the shearing house of the shepherds in the way, Yehu met with the brethren of Ahaziah, king of Judah. Ahaziah, king of Judah, was a son-in-law of Ahaz, and said, who are ye? And they answered, we are the brethren of Ahaziah, and we go down to salute the children of the king and the children of the queen. Now that meant that he was a relative, only a relative by marriage of Ahaz. So he's considered still part of Ahaz. And what does Yehu say? And he said, take them alive. And they took them alive and slew them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men, neither left he any of them. Verse 17 continues on pretty much. I don't want to go too much because I won't spend the time. But in verse 17, and when he came into Samaria, he smote all the remainder of Achav in Samaria till he had destroyed him, according to the words of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. What's going on here? When a king is placed in the place of another king, he wipes out the total family, the total royal family. Even sons-in-laws are wiped out and killed. Okay? This is the introduction and the point that we should take from the introduction to what we're going to read from verse 10 on. Okay? That what Ahaz was aware of was that he was going to be murdered. His whole family, the whole house of David, would be wiped out completely. We're not just talking about deposing a king and sending a different person in his place, and the rest of the family go, they take their money and they go to, Bermuda, they live their life's house in peace somewhere else. No, the whole family gets wiped out to the last person. Okay? That is a danger that is now presented to Ahaz by Isaiah. That's the background. You have to understand what's going on here. We're talking about total destruction of the house of David. An end to the promise that Hashem made to David and Solomon, that their kingdom, their family would exist. A total wiping out of that. That's what's being talked about here. Okay? So when we get it, that's your context for what's going on. So now let's go on. And we have to understand, who is the child we're talking about here? Okay? Before we get to a discussion, we have to understand, well, who is the child at this sign? So we see in verse 15, it gives a little bit of description about that child and that life of the child. It says, curd and honey shall he eat, when he knows to refuse the evil and choose the good. Yea, before the child shall know to refuse evil and choose the good, the land of these two kings thou hast horror of shall be forsaken. So this child that we're talking about is a child that's going to be born that by the time it eats curds and honey. Now, interesting enough, it's if you look at verse 22, it tells us when these two kings fall down that actually curd and honey is going to be so plentiful that everybody's going to have it. Okay? Apparently, curd and honey was something that only rich people had, but after the fall of the two, everybody's going to have it. Okay, so this child who's being described is going to live at a time when these two kings are going to be wiped out. So, what is this time? I want to go into chapter 8. Chapter 8, we see the verse about the birth of Isaiah's son. Okay, and in verse 4, what does it say? Before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father, my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoils of Samaria shall be carried away before the king of Assyria. What do we see? Isaiah's son and the child that's being talked about in Isaiah 7 live in the same time. They're contemporaries. So we see here a clear indication of what the period of time is when this child lives. Now, it has to be admitted, some people think that the child that's discussed about here is the son of the king. Some think it's actually Isaiah's child that's mentioned again in 8. And it could possibly be any, because the verse doesn't say which child it is. It just says which the woman is and indicates which woman it is. We're going to get to that in 1 second. But what we do see quite clearly is that the child in 7 and the child, Isaiah's child in 8, if they're not the same child, they're contemporaries. They live at the same time. The child in 7 is going to be a certain age when the two kings disappear. Isaiah's son appears to be a similar type of age in chapter 8. Okay, so we see that, number 1, we see what Ahaz's problem is. Number 2, we see that the child that's being talked about is living in that time. So we see what's going on is, before we even read what's there, we see that what's being told is Ahaz is going to be given words to tell him that his problems are going to be over. And this child is related to what the answer is, but his problems are going to be over.
So that's what I was going to say, is that the urgency or the plight that King Ahaz is found, it would make no sense if the prophecy or what's being referred to here had something to do with a child 100 generations later.
Absolutely.
Like, how is that going to help him?
Absolutely, that's what it is. But unless you have to be really sensitive to how real serious this problem is. I mean, it's not just Ahaz who's shivering in his boots. All of his royal people around him, they're all afraid because they know if they lose, it's off with their heads. That's it, the end of it. Okay? Because that's what happens. We saw, remember when I read the passage in 2 Kings, that's what it means. Okay? It doesn't mean that he's going to be deposed and, he'll live on a pension somewhere. Okay? It's not they're going to go away somewhere and they can, go to a friendly kingdom, something like that, which happens when, dictators today, they negotiate to give up their control. They take the money and they run somewhere. That's not what happens then. It's off with their heads and that's it. They're all gone. Okay? So when we look at this, you have to remember what really is his problem. And the truth of the matter is, as a king, he's a pretty wicked guy. You got to admit. Okay? So let's now start in verse 10 and read exactly what the prophecy says. I'm going to read it again from the JPS. And we'll then look at what it says in the KJV, which you will see where they do, again, a little bit of creative translations, and we'll deal with it. So in verse 10, and the Lord spoke unto Ahaz, saying, ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God, ask it either in the depth or in the height above. Okay? So God says to him, listen, okay, you know what's the story. I'm telling you it's not going to be. You're not a very big believer, okay? Mm-hmm. You're not such a righteous guy, okay? You're a skeptic, okay? You're not, okay? So I'm telling you, ask a sign. So Ahaz, of course, acts like he's really religious, but Ahaz says, I will not ask, neither will I try the Lord. Mm-hmm. So then what does God do? And he said, hear ye now, O house of David. So he's speaking to everybody there. All of them are all the same. They're all in the same boat, by the way. Mm-hmm. Although the primary person who he's talking is Ahaz, but really he's speaking to everybody in the house of David because they're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. Okay? Whatever happens to Ahaz is going to happen to anybody who is descendant of King David. Anyone who has a right to the throne from Davidic descent, he's going to go just like Yahoo did to the descendants of Achav. All of them are gone. They're going to kill all of them. That's the way it works. Okay. It's let's be blunt. It's not a very pleasant period of time to live in when then there's wars. There were no Geneva Conventions, none of the niceties what we have developed afterwards. Okay, those things didn't exist. Okay, that's the real world. That's the real world. This is history. This is really what it was like. Okay, that's what it is. You went in a city and you wiped out everybody. You killed all the men. You took the women. Okay, that's what happened. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Thucydides. The history of Peloponnesian Wars brings the island of Melos, where the Athenians wiped out all the men, killed all the males, and took the women into slavery. That's the way it was. Okay, no Geneva Convention existed. I mean, it's a little objectionable now, but that's really what life was like then. Okay, so when you read it in the Tanakh, the way it is, that's the unvarnished history of exactly what it was like. Okay, no Geneva Convention until Geneva, which didn't exist at the time. Before that, all bets, there were no rules of war. The strong did what they wanted. Okay, so here, God continues. Okay, Achaz says he doesn't want triumph. So he said, okay, here, O house of David, because everybody's in the same boat here, is it a small thing for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, the young woman shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Okay, Emmanuel basically means God is with us, just like Isaiah again. Remember, Isaiah had a son, Shal-Yishiv, saying that a remnant will remain. Emmanuel means that God is with us. Okay, they didn't think that God was with them. As we see in the book of Chronicles, we see that already the kingdom of Israel and Aram had already conquered part of the kingdom of Judah and slaughtered many people. They didn't have so much faith, but God was saying, 1 second, no, God is with you. I'm going to show you that God's with you because these guys are going to disappear and they're going to get wiped out from Assyria. Okay, these guys think they're the big guys on the block, but that's it. It's over with. Okay, so that's what it's talking. The sign is, what's the sign going to be? This child. As you watch the child grow, some people, when the children grow, they like make marks on the wall, the size of the kid. When the child gets to a certain, they make another mark. They make a sign on the wall. My child at this age was this size. At this age and do it. I don't know if you do it or whatever. I don't know if you have children with it, but there's some that do that to mark as a sign of the age. God is giving the sign. What's the sign? When this child reaches a certain place, that's when it's going to happen by. So what's the sign? Curd and honey shall he eat when he knoweth to refuse evil and choose good. Yea, before the child shall know to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings thou hast horror of shall be forsaken. What's that mean? Let's say you have on a wall that a child gets to be a certain age. That's when they know good and evil. Okay. Before that child grows to that size, that's your sign. Before he gets to that time, they're going to be gone. Before that time, they're going to be signed. Okay. Continues, the Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy fathers' house days that have not come, and they that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Syria. So he's going to bring Assyria onto them, and bad things are going to happen. Okay, and he continues what happens there. And the rest of the chapter is basically talking about the kinds of things that are going to happen, the destructions that are going to happen to those kingdoms. Again, verse 22 is an important one to remember, that says that once these have been destroyed, there's going to be such a plenty that everybody's going to have curd and honey. Okay. Now, as you know, which we will read it again, in the KJV, they translate it differently. Okay. Here's 7:14 there. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and call his name Emmanuel. Okay. So the question, of course, is, what does the word actually mean? Now, in the Hebrew, the text reads like this. Let me get back to it here. The text reads like that. Verse 14, here it is. L'chain yitain Adonai hilochem. Therefore, the Lord will give to you. Ois, a sign. Hinehu alma, the alma. We're going to discuss that means really a young woman. Hora is pregnant, yolated, and she will give birth then to a son. Alma is here. Now, what has to be understood, first of all, in Hebrew grammar, there's no word the in Hebrew. Okay, so the difference between a house and the house, where the direct, object talking the house as opposed to a house, in Hebrew there's no word for a and the. There's just the noun itself, and if you want to say the something, you put a hey in front of it, and in grammatical color hey, you do the known hey because it signifies a specific one. So when Isaiah is talking there, he says Alma, he's talking about this young woman. Okay. Again, we saw the KJV translated as virgin. We're going to discuss about that, how that's not true. But you have to understand that what part of an understanding is that it's speaking about a specific woman. Okay, one that they would know. We don't necessarily know it, of course, because we're not there. Okay, could be Isaiah's wife. It could be the king's wife. It could be another woman who's there. Okay, Jewish commentaries go between it being the child being Hezekiah or being Isaiah's son. But just to put out it there, both of them seem to me logical. But there's, it could be somebody else who we don't know. But the text is quite clear that those people standing there, everybody in the house of David, all the royal family that's there, they know who we're talking about. We don't necessarily need to know because we don't need to know. At the end of Job, God tells Job, you don't need to know everything. Okay, that's basically what he tells him. Not everything we need to know. We just need to know what's important for us to know. Okay, now the question is, what does it mean? Does it mean virgin or does it mean a young woman? So I think I want to read to you, there's a book out there from Dr. Michael Brown. It's called Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. Okay, and I'm going to read, it's a little bit long, but I'm going to read the text exactly as he has it. Okay, so talking about Isaiah 7:14, he said, this leads to a question that has received almost endless discussion for close to 20 centuries. Does the word Alma mean virgin? My answer, as a committed believer in Yeshua the Messiah, may surprise you. While the word Alma can refer to a virgin, it does not specifically mean virgin. Its basic meaning is primarily related to adolescence, not sexual chastity. The evidence is actually fairly clear. There is a masculine equivalent to Alma, namely Elam. Same words, except Alma has the hey at the end, which makes it feminine, but Elam does not have. Occurring twice in the Hebrew Bible, it doesn't occur very much. I should also point out the word Alma also doesn't appear very much. So it's a rare word. Makes it very interesting because it's a rare word to wonder where it came from. It may be archaic or maybe something else, but whatever. Dr. Brown happens to be much more of a linguist like that. I'm not as much of a linguist, although I know the language well. Okay, but it does appear rarely. So again, I'll read again. Number one, there is a masculine equivalent to Alma, namely Elam, occurring twice in the Hebrew scriptures. The first one is 1 Samuel 17:56, and the other one is 20:22, and also 1 Samuel. It simply means youth, a young man, with no reference to virginity at all. Just substitute male virgin in either of these two passages, and the absurdity of such a translation we've seen at once. So he gives the example of 1 Samuel 17:56. Where Saul wants to learn more about David after he killed Goliath. The story there is that David kills Goliath, and King Saul wants to know who this guy was. Did David say, find out whose son this male virgin is? It doesn't make sense. It's a joke. He simply said, find out whose son this young man is, because Elam meant young man, not male virgin. Very important. What he's saying here is absolutely 100% right on. Okay, so that's his first reason. Okay, number two, let me get it. The words Elam and Alma should be derived from a Semitic root meaning to come into puberty, to come into heat for an animal. Okay, he's talking here as a scholar in linguist, which he is a scholar of that, by the way. I am not familiar with this, but I will take his word on it. Not from the Semitic root meaning to hide, be hidden, with the supposed reference to virginity. What he's mentioning here, by the way, is a number of these supposed Christian scholars say Alma means virgin because it comes from Elam. Elam means to be hidden. And he says, no, that's not what it comes from. Okay? It means from words meaning to be for puberty. Okay? Again, I have to rely on him on this thing because I happen to know he is a scholar of the ancient Middle East languages. Okay, so he's talking about something he certainly does. Number 3, in the other Semitic languages, Alma does not specifically mean virgin. That may be true, but that is actually true. 4, within the Tanakh, Alma does not in and of itself clearly and unambiguously mean virgin. Outside of Isaiah 7:14, Alma appears 6 times in the Old Testament, and in 4 of these cases, the NIV, a conservative Christian translation, does not render the word as virgin. Why? Because that is not the primary meaning of the word. Number 5, the related noun alumim, occurring in Isaiah 54:4 and Psalm 89:45, is correctly translated as youth and not virginity in the KJV itself. Interesting. And the NKJV and the SB and the NIV, all of which translate Alma in Isaiah 7:14 as virgin. So again, we see here an example of creative translation in order to fulfill your theological bias.
Right.
Okay, and let me just continue. We said, again, youthfulness, not sexual chastity, is the basic meaning of the word. 6, in Aramaic, this I do know, Alma, or actually in Aramaic, it's Almata, sometimes referred to a woman who has been sexually active. Almata in Aramaic means, Alma in Aramaic means a young woman. Okay? It does not mean virgin. The word in Aramaic usually used for virgin, and if you're Jewish, you see this because every marriage contract that we write for a woman who gets married, who's, the women are virgins when they get married, use the word basilta, which is the Aramaic for batula in Hebrew. Okay? They're very cognate. Aramaic and Hebrew are very, very close to each other. As far as I can tell, the Aramaic and Hebrew are the closest languages to each other among the Semitic languages. There's similarities, for example, if I hear Arabic, there's some words in Arabic I make up because it's Semitic languages, but Aramaic is much, much closer. So he ends this, to put it simply, there are women who are 50 years old and have never been with a man, making them 50-year-old virgins. And this is perfectly acceptable English usage, since virginity has to do with sexual chastity, not age. But it would be incorrect to speak of a 50-year-old Alma in biblical Hebrew usage, since the root Ilam has more to do with age and sexual development, adolescence, than with sexual chastity. Now, he, in his footnote 44, he mentions something that's very important. It is often argued that in the culture of the time, a woman who was indeed an Alma, in particular one who was subject of the prophecy concerning the significant child she was to bear, was presumed to be a virgin, since it is argued there is no record of a married Alma in the Bible. There are, however, several problems with this argument, including, 1, if the goal of the prophecy was clearly and ambiguously declared that there would be a virgin birth, a qualifying statement would need to be made. And he says comments about it. Number 2, the cognate evidence and other Semitic languages does not support this premise. Number 3, many scholars believe that Proverbs 30:19 speaks of an Alma having sexual intercourse. Okay, so he brings a number of reasons as to why Alma there definitely does not necessarily mean a virgin. There are more that I brought up and mentioned to other people. First of all, you have to understand something. The society was much different then. Okay, people married much earlier. Until about 200 years ago, people married at puberty. The reason is because you wanted to have more children. Many children died in childbirth. Many women died in childbirth. My grandmother, for example, died in childbirth. Okay, it was very common. So women and men married young because there was less chance of children reaching adulthood. So children marrying at the age of 12, for example, or 11, 12, 13, that age, would not be unusual. And everybody understands that a girl who was 11 or 12, 13 would be called an Alma, even if she had been married. Even if she had already a child, she would still be an Alma. So it's important to understand that in Isaiah's time, women were getting married at 11, 12 years old, as soon as they approached puberty. I actually saw the Game of Thrones. I tried to keep up with some of modern culture. Remember, there's a whole thing about when she flowered, that she can marry the king.
Uh-huh.
That's because
Right.
when you have puberty, you are able to get married, always, because children didn't live until. So when that happened, puberty, and that would be, I mean, in the show, she's obviously not 11 or 12 years old. She's much older, but in fact, in real life, she would have been 11 or 12 years old.
Mhm.
So, even the Alma, if you understand the Alma as being a young woman, you cannot say in any way whatsoever that she has not already been married and he has not already had
Right.
sexual relations. Because at that time, now we don't. I mean, our girls' daughters at 11, 12 years old, they're not mature enough to get married under any way whatsoever. I mean, we mature much, much later. There's people
Yeah.
30 years old and not mature. But 250 years, life was much different. You matured much quicker and much younger. So life was different.
Yeah.
So,
And if she was unmarried, wouldn't that raise issues regarding the legitimacy of her pregnancy or something else?
well, no, she what happens after the first night? She's no longer a virgin, isn't she?
Mhm.
She became pregnant. She becomes pregnant normally. So after the first night, she's no longer a virgin.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that is what I'm not going to teach you about the facts of life, but that's what happens, right? I mean, that's what happens. After the
Sure.
first night, she's no longer a virgin. So yeah, she may still be a virgin, but after the first night, she's no longer a virgin. That's just the way it is.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, all of these discussions are trying to draw a circle around your arrows. That's basically what it is. Okay. But if you think about it, just use your mind a second and remember what period of time you're talking about. In real life, there's no way you can make that word into meaning what it is.
Mhm. Now you're going to talk about how to best translate the hara.
Horror
There.
means that she is pregnant. That most of our translators in the present tense that she is pregnant.
Right. So that's
That
the
yes, that again is another issue.
uh-huh.
But the truth of the matter is like this: you might argue this sometimes, maybe, but because we know the child is living the same time as Isaiah's child, we've already pegged the child as when the mother was, became pregnant 9 months before the child was born.
Yeah.
That's
'Cause
that's
it seems to
yep.
me oxymoronic to both affirm that she's a virgin and that she's pregnant.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. Again, but you only get to that because we're talking about something in that period of time. Once we know it's in that period of time, whether horror means that she's going to become pregnant or she is pregnant is not really relevant. And I want to concentrate on the real. Let's hone on the things that really are without getting sidetracked on some things, because there are many important points that are here. Okay.
Okay.
Now, so what is the Hebrew word that would mean for, okay, so we have Alma here. I want to bring up one other thing, because sometimes before I go to the next issue about the Hebrew word for virgin, which is Betula, or Basula is the way I would say it, there's the word Parthenos. The New Testament was written in Greek. The word in Greek there is Parthenos.
Mhm.
So it's claimed that Isaiah uses also the word in the Greek translation.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Septuagint.
In the Greek translation, uses the word Parthenos. So maybe it means virgin because that's what it meant then. The problem is that if you look at Genesis 34, verse 3, let's look at it in the KJV because the KJV is even better. Okay. Verse 3. Okay. In the Greek, the word Parthenos appears there. Now, in chapter 34, it's talking about the daughter of Dinah, who was captured by Shechem and becomes raped. And it says in verse 1 that he lay with her, means he had sexual relations with her. In verse 2, excuse me. And in verse 3, and his soul clave, I'm reading the KJV this right now, so you should understand. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel and spoke kindly unto the damsel. There, words damsel, basically another name for young girl, young woman. Okay. It does not use virgin because the word is Parthenos. And it's really not relevant to call Dinah Parthenos after she's been raped.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Again, these are just,
yeah.
You have to use common sense, facts of life. That's just the way it is. Now, I have heard Dr. Ehrman says and others that actually, like many words change meaning. So at one time, Parthenos meant a young woman and could have meant a virgin also. But by the time of the writing of Matthew, it just stayed meaning virgin. Okay. Words do change. That's very common. For example, just take the word gay. Okay. If you said somebody was gay 200 years ago, it means he was a person who was very happy. Okay. Gay today means he's a homosexual, right? So Words change in times. Word change. Okay. So the word Parthenos is just like that. It just changed over time.
And I do want to say that there are examples in the classical Greek literature where that is the case, where you do
Right.
see
Yeah.
a usage of Parthenos without the sexual, the
Right.
virginity aspect to it.
But again, it's something that's it's not uncommon for words to change meaning over time. Okay. So, the translation of the portion of Genesis and Isaiah, I don't know how much far apart from it, but the word Parthenos, they just meant it as a young woman. And later on, the next issue we have to, so what is the word for Betula? So I'm going to read Dr. Brown again, because here I'm going to disagree with him actually. But I want to read it because this is an answer you're going to get many times. Okay. Because the question is, if we want to say virgin, we should have used the word Betula. So Dr. Brown is going to say, well, that's not going to work very much. And I'm going to show you why it actually does work. Even in verses where the translation of virgin is appropriate for Betula, talks about that, a qualifying phrase is sometimes added, as in Genesis 24:16. The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin, whom no man had known. Now, he's not denying that. Obviously, Betula clearly not equivalent meant virgin here. There will be no need to explain this kind, that this Betula and never had intercourse with a man. That's not actually true. Just think of normal English usage. We would never say a young woman that was a virgin. She never had sexual intercourse in her life. Okay. Virginity today, however, is not the same as then. Okay. Virginity meant something very specific. Okay. We'll get into a certain text in the book of Deuteronomy about that. But virginity was very important. A girl who was not a virgin at marriage was looked down upon. So virginity meant something very, very, very much. Okay. Now, if a woman had sexual relations, what we call unnatural sexual relations, for example, that wouldn't affect her virginity. Okay. So that's why, for example, one of the reasons why the text is given for one of the reasons why the text mentions that, because she was living in a particular country where sexual morality was common, but girls before marriage were very careful to maintain their virginity until at least they got married. They were not so careful about other things, but they were that. I'm not going to be more graphic because I know children will be listening to this, but you understand what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, so here Dr. Brown says that, however, that does not fit very well. And the reason is very simple. Let's look at a biblical text, because remember, the Torah in a biblical text is going to talk in chapter 22 of the book of Deuteronomy. It talks about marriage. And again, marriage to a woman who was not a virgin, who was claimed to be a virgin, is going to be a problem. So I'm going to read from the Hebrew, the JPS first, and then we'll go to the KJV, which has some reading. So it says in verse 13.
Deuteronomy 22?
Verse 13, yes. These deal with we're getting into there on the laws of marriage. Remember, if a man, when marriage basically always was considered some kind of almost like a contractual thing. Okay, I'm marrying a woman; she's a virgin. The father's telling me this, my daughter's a virgin, and there was a dowry we would give to the father and stuff like that. This was ancient customs. They're not really relevant even today. Even the Jewish community, they're not really relevant today. But okay, so if a girl was a virgin, she'd never been married before, didn't have sexual relations before, she was, considered chaste and everything like that. And that's a very valuable thing. You want a wife that's not running around all the time. So what happens? Chapter 22, verse 13, it says, if any man take a wife and go on to her, and yes, relations with her, and hate her, and he hates her, and lay wanton charges against her, meaning he claims and bring an evil name upon her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came nigh to her, I found not in her the tokens of virginity. Mm-hmm. Okay? He found out she wasn't a virgin. What it means is that the normal thing is that when a woman is a virgin, when she has her first relations, that she will bleed. Now, what does it say in the KJV? Let's see if I can find it here. Okay. The KJV, it says the same thing. Then shall the father of the damsel, in KJV, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. Okay. Now, again, let's go back to what it continues in, in the JPS. Then the father of the damsel and her mother will take and bring forth the token of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the gate. Okay. Now, though the words that, let's go back to KJV again. So what's it say after that? And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this woman, and he hated her. Okay. That was unto the elders. Okay. And 15, and then to the father of the damsel and her mother to bring forth tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city of the gate. Okay. So he says the tokens of virginity. What is the word in Hebrew for tokens of virginity? It is besulim or betulim. Okay? Signs of virginity is betulim. The noun form of the signs of virginity is from the word betula, betulim. Okay? That's why when it says a virgin here, when you need to have the actual legal sense of the word, it uses the word betula. Now, he brings other sources where we can get into all kinds of arguments of the grammar of that, and I can go on for this. We can go discuss this for 1 or 2 hours. But we have to consider when the Tanakh, when the Bible talks about legally, who is a woman who has not had a child? It says she's a betula. She doesn't add any other words to that. Saying betula alone is sufficient to know that she's never had any sexual relations.
Right.
And it comes with betulim. The Hebrew itself tells it comes with betulim, which is a sign of her virginity.
So do you think Michael Brown is just ignoring this passage, or
if Brown knows this, so what's his answer? How does he deal with something in Matthew? Okay, so his justification for Matthew is very interesting, and I really wanted to read it to you. Again, it's a little bit farther. I think it's page 24 in his book. What I read before is, I think, 2021. In 24, this is what he says. All this points to the fact that the birth of a great importance was being announced to the prophet. So it's a birth of great importance, especially for David's house. It was God's answer to the attack on the Davidic dynasty, and it was meant as a demonstration of his power and reality. As Matthew looked back at this prophecy in context, this is what he saw. Now, this is Dr. Brown's rationalization. The birth of Emmanuel is highly significant in Isaiah 7:8. There are 2 major messianic prophecies found in Isaiah 9 and 11. Now, what he's doing here, very importantly, is he's cutting off 9 from 7, 8, and 10. Okay? He's removing 10 and making 9 like a part of 11. Okay? Now, when we talk about Isaiah 9, where I'm going to show you that actually Isaiah 9 is associated with 7, 8, 9, and 10, and not with 11, which is the start of a new subject, we'll see why this is a problem. For the moment, just look at it. What he's doing is a little fancy footwork. Okay? Very good. Dr. Brown is very intelligent and does this very well. Yeshua's birth truly was a supernatural sign. Part of the sign that was being Alma was in fact a virgin that she gave birth to a son. But Yeshua was Emmanuel. That's very fine. Okay? Remember we talked about eisegesis. Okay? We talked about eisegesis. Okay? Where someone gives an interpretation and says it means something, but that's not what the text said. The text we've clearly shown and is talking about what the problem of Achas is, what's happening exactly at that time. That's what the whole child is. Okay? Brown is building up something based on what the New Testament says, not what it says. And if Matthew happened because he believed the stuff in the New Testament, built it up himself, that doesn't change what God's word was.
it's clearly not about some miracle child?
That child clearly is a contemporary of Isaiah's child in chapter 8. There's no way of getting
it's
around
meant to
that.
serve, and it's clearly meant to serve as a sign for Ahaz. Not that the child is going to do anything. And the sign, and I think that's where the name comes in to play, is that because most Christians will read the translation of Emmanuel as like God with us, like God incarnated and now is among us, but it's more like God is on our side of this.
Well, that means God's. I mean, let's put it this way. I don't know if you know, but I have friends named Emmanuel. We don't think that we're saying that this guy's God incarnate. We're saying that name, like many Jewish names have God's name in it, My second name, Yechezkel, Ezekiel, has God's name in it. It means God strengthens. Okay, doesn't mean that I'm God. We don't give names because because names are names. But the point is, Emmanuel just means it's the child is telling us that God is with us. Remember the whole thing that's going on until now is Achaz doesn't believe that God is with him anymore.
Right.
In fact, he acts that way. He sends money to Assyria because he ignores the fact that God's with him. But Isaiah tells him, no, God is with you. Even though you don't believe it, God is still with you. That's what the name means. It signifies. Now,
and it's not that God is not with us like he's among us, but that he's not on our side like collectively as
correct.
As a nation.
God's with us. God is still with the Jewish people. And again, remember we looked at some of these prophecies in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, very clear, 23, 33, and Ezekiel 34. God is very clear there. God is still with the Jewish people, even in exile, even when they've sinned him. God is still with them. And quite frankly, if you need to know any other proof that God's with the Jewish people, you're looking at somebody who should not be alive. If you know anything about Jewish history, in the lands of the Jewish people and all the suffering and and everything went on, that there should be a Jewish person here talking to you today is just miraculous. If you just know anything about history, okay, that is because God is still with the Jewish people until today. I want to mention one more thing. I mentioned about Brown's justification for Matthew. There's another justification for Matthew I heard. I haven't heard it recently, but I have heard it one, and that says that actually in the verse, Isaiah is speaking to two things. He's speaking to the house of David separate and to the king separate, as if they have different worries. But as we saw, in fact, that's not true. In 1 through 9, Isaiah 1 through 9, where we see what's going on, Adam and Israel are trying to replace the whole house of Israel. Right. It's not just the king who has a problem. It's everybody has a problem. So whether the prophet's speaking to the whole house or Achaz at that time, it refers to everybody. All of them are in the same boat. Okay? And I think that pretty much covers every issue regarding this. So let's just review very quickly what we're talking about. Isaiah 7:14, the context is very clear. We see from verse 1 to 9, and then if you look at the book of Kings, and especially in the book of Chronicles, which goes a little bit more about what's going on, we see that the king and the house of David are in very, very serious danger of being destroyed, overthrown, and totally obliterated. Okay? As we saw in the second book of Kings with the house of Achav, that when a new dynasty takes over, the old dynasty, all of the people were wiped out. That's the context for what Isaiah is going to speak about. And when we look into it, the description of the history of the child, and we compare it to Isaiah's child in the next verse, that the child will reach a certain age, and then these two kingdoms, Aram and Israel, will be destroyed, will no longer be a problem to Judah. And we see Isaiah, the same thing. Aram and Israel will no longer be a problem when his child gets it. We see these two children are contemporaries. So the child that this person is going to give birth to is a child born at that time, and is a proper sign to the house of David and everybody there to know that when this child reaches a certain age, all these people are going to disappear. And then, of course, we can go back to the prophecy now and see that the prophet is talking about a child will be born to a woman. As Dr. Brown is quite clear about that, is not specifying a virgin. It specifies the word that means a woman. As I pointed out from Deuteronomy, if it had wanted to be specific that the woman was a virgin, it would have mentioned somehow the word Betula there, and it does not. And that's essentially what the issue is here. The word Emmanuel, we're going to be discussing more about naming conventions in the Tanakh. But as I said here, Emmanuel just means God's with us. They had lost faith in God. And the whole purpose of this prophecy is to say, no, God has not forgotten you. You're going to have a child. This child's going to be a sign when it gets up, because that's going to be a sign to you that God is still with the Jewish people at that time. That in a nutshell. And that's all.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm so looking forward to where are we going off next? Should we?
The next one will be Isaiah 9. They want to go, I think Hosea 11:1 is the one next on the list. Isaiah 9 is going to be pretty long, just like Isaiah 7 was a long one, because there's a lot of information you have to fully understand what this prophecy is about. So Isaiah 9 is also a little bit more. Although our introduction here about the situation was going politically is very good of a help it'll cut down a lot of information you need to know for Isaiah 9, because Isaiah 9 is building on that. 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all part of a consistent prophecy talking about the events of Aram, Israel, and Assyria, and Judah.
Excellent.
Obviously. Okay. And then there's a few, I think 11:1. I don't have my list in front of me at the moment. I know Hosea 11:1 is going to come in there after that. That's going to be shorter. We'll probably be able to get through many more in the next session.
Awesome. So there you have it, folks. Right here, Rabbi Moshe Shulman is providing us with his critical commentary on these so-called messianic prophecies, these so-called fulfillments through Jesus. And we're giving you the right context. We're giving you the right translation. We're giving deep dive into the language and how it's really working and how it doesn't really work. And so, folks, if this is the kind of thing that you're interested in learning more, and you've just now stepped on into this video today, please go back and watch the first installment. And then also be sure to click on the links that I will be providing in the description below, where you can have access to more of Rabbi Moshe Shulman's works and his website, his YouTube channel, etc. So we're glad that you've made it through the end. And we really appreciate you, Rabbi, for putting in your time and giving us your expertise on this. It's been really awesome.
I'd like to thank you. Also, I'd like to remind you that everybody watching this should subscribe both to Mark's channel and my channel. If you're seeing it through my channel, then go over to Mark's. I'm going to put in a comment how to get to him and subscribe to him and support him in, this, if you like this kind of stuff. And if you're on Mark's, just go to mine and subscribe to mine also, so you can see other things that I be doing. And if you subscribe to him, you see other things he's doing. Your support is always very much appreciated.
Yes.
It encourages us to do more of this kind of work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much. And folks, this has been an episode of Apostate of Mind.